I'm going to turn the stage over to the amazing Adobe XD team, and Gayatri, Hilary, and Ainsley will be speaking with us tonight. So go ahead, take it away, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll go first. We promised each other we'd do alphabetical order. Thank you for Katrina for the intro. I'm Ainsley. I am a designer on XD, as we've established, and I've been on the XD team for about 2.5 years, I think, and I've worked on various aspects of the product, and have been working as a UX designer for, I think, 8 years, which is kind of, more than it feels like. But prior to that, I was kind of dabbling in graphic design, and I had gotten my degree in architecture in school. So I sort of transitioned into a career in UX and have been faking it ever since.
Nice. Thank you, Ainsley. Fake it till you make it, right?
All right, so my name's Gayatri, so I fall right after Ainsley in the alphabetical order. I have been at XD for almost 2 years, I think this September. I joined right after finishing grad school at Georgia Tech. And I feel like what this working at XD for me was kind of completely unexpected, but it has been the most unexpectedly rewarding kind of surprise, because I never imagined myself designing a design tool. I came from a design background, but you kind of always imagine yourself working in an app or like some kind of software company, but not actually making the tool that you're going to be working with, which has been kind of an extraordinary learning experience. I feel like I show up to work and I get a free education, so why did I even go get a master's? But I absolutely adore like my time working with everyone in the last 2 years. And I'm also kind of learning to like fake it until I make it. And embracing that. I remember one of the times going to Ainsley and being like, I feel like when I joined XD, I felt like I knew everything. And the longer I'm here, I feel like I don't know anything. And I was like, does that feeling never go away? And Hilary told me, she's like, no, you just get used to it. So that was really good advice.
Nice. Thank you so much, Gayatri.
Well, I'm Hilary. Ainsley, I'm just realizing our intros are almost exactly the same. I have almost been on the team 2.5 years. I've also almost been doing UX 8 years. And my background is also in architecture. So we're, really on the same path there.
Sorry. Tell your story.
Yeah. I think something about me is that actually every role I've done in UX has been around kind of enabling creatives to create. So I worked in video editing for a while at GoPro. So, creating services for mobile video editing for both regular and 360 video content. And then I moved over to Adobe, and we've been working on XD ever since. So, yeah.
Great. Awesome. Welcome all. So before we jumpstart into the questions, I just want to let all the attendees know that we want to try to make this event as interactive as possible. So we do have like a Q&A form where you can submit questions if you have any questions for the team. Also, we mentioned about the Slack channel, so we'll try to keep an eye out on both the chat here and also on Slack to capture all your questions. So the way we're going to run through this is that we have some default questions that we're going to have a discussions with the XD teams, and then toward the end, we are going to reserve some time for audience questions. And also we want to allow you to be able to speak. If you feel comfortable doing it, you don't have to turn on your camera, but you can if you want, so that we can have like more of a dialogue for this event. Cool. So with that, like me personally, I'm like super excited about this meetup because I'm like very curious on how do you design for a design tool. So I think that's like super interesting. I have like, so my first question is to get some background information. First question, how was XD born?
Yeah, so I did a little recon on this to get my story straight, but XD really started as a project in 2015. I checked with the founding designer, Talon Wadsworth, and he said that as he remembers it, it kind of started in summer 2015. And it started because, as you all probably could guess, Sketch was really getting a lot of market share, and all these UX designers were using Sketch as a tool, and Adobe, as the maker of creative tools, wanted to get in on the action. So there was Sketch, and I think other things were starting to come out. So they were like really kind of late to the game, but knew that they wanted to make a tool specifically for UX designers, because I think people, actually, when I just first was dabbling in this type of work, I was kind of using Illustrator because I'd used it in architecture school, but and I know some people were using Photoshop to make mockups, and then you exported that to another program, and etc. But so that was the origin of it, is like wanting to create a tool for that specific purpose. And so that was 2015. I think they sort of sneaked it at Max 2015, which Max is our big company conference for Creative Cloud that happens every fall, where we kind of show all the new features of everything and updates and talk about new products. And then the beta launched in 2016 in March 2016. Sorry, I took notes. And then the 1.0 launched in fall of 2017. So it's been kind of like in the ether for about 5 years now, but it's been only an official Adobe product for coming up on 3 years now, like officially kind of public.
And I love that you mentioned the fact that people use Photoshop to design web pages, which I have done for the longest time. And I remember at one of the organizations I worked at, like we had this internal debate about what tool is the best. Do we use Photoshop? Do we use InDesign? Or do we use Illustrator? And so like at that time, there was just like not a single tool that stood out that was like really good for making interactions design. And so like nowadays I tell people that how lucky they are to have like so many options.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great tools out there, which makes our job really fun because we can constantly kind of be inspired by that.
Nice. So Hilary, Gayatri, any things to add to that?
I think personally for me, I remember very distinctly in 2012, 2013, working with Illustrator and then quickly realizing that I couldn't click 2 pages, and then switching to InDesign, and then switching to exporting my designs to InVision, using InVision. And then from like, I was like stumbling around, and I feel like using InVision was like happened for a while. And then I used Protopie. And then the first time I used Adobe XD was I think 3 years ago or 2 years ago, where I was quickly trying to prototype something and I organically ended up at XD. And it was like my default tool I was using because I was just doing quick mock-ups for a master's program where we didn't having a great UI export design wasn't the point. The point was to communicate the user journey. And I feel like 90%, okay, 80%, 85% of the time, that's what UX designers are trying to do, is communicate the journey. And that's what XD did so fast. Yeah, that's been my UX design journey. I don't think I like ever formally worked in any other UX tool except for maybe InVision and Protopie.
Nice.
I actually have two other little anecdotes that I wanted to add, because I was just talking with Talon to prep to tell this story the right way. And one was that he validated that the initial kind of idea for XD was prototyped in Keynote, actually, because Keynote at the time had the best, like the auto animate feature and the best way to or they call it magic move, and the best way to kind of like click through a vision. And then the other thing that he was sharing with me was that around the time they started working on XD was also when Slack was first kind of in preview. It was like an early peek into using Slack, and they had a channel for what was then called Sparkler, and they were like sharing work in it and talking about the project. And at that time they didn't realize you could make a channel private, so people would just come by and like from the rest of the company and check out the progress and give feedback. And that was how some of the first like hires to that team. So Lars, who Gayatri and Hilary and I know, who was one of the first like additional designers, that's how he kind of came onto the team, is because like the people who were really interested in the project wound up getting involved through the Slack discussion and then becoming officially a part of the team. And I never knew that, and I thought that was really kind of cool.
Awesome. Cool. Shall we move to the next question, which is some backgrounds about the finders. So I think maybe Ainsley, you kind of already touched a little bit on that, but like, is there like names? Do we know like who are the key players to get XD started?
Yeah, so the founding designer was Talon Wadsworth, and then he worked with a couple of PMs, one of which is now our head of product. Actually, I'm so bad with titles. It was Andrew Shorten. VP. Sorry. I'm the worst. I'm like, he's my grand boss.
So it's two levels up, right?
I think more, I don't know, but he recently is now VP, was head of kind of co-head of product. But it was Talon and Andrew and another PM named Tom from the beginning, and an engineer named NJ. So those were kind of the initial people, and they all worked at Adobe already, and then they were kind of tapped to start this new project. And as far as Talon's background, he had been designing at Adobe for a while on other kind of like cross Creative Cloud projects, and he had gone to CCA here in San Francisco, California College of the Arts.
Also with a background in architecture.
Oh yeah.
Nice. So let's see, my next question. So what was XD initially prototyped on? Like before XD, like did you use like Photoshop to prototype it, or like Illustrator, or?
A lot of Keynote files on Dropbox, but also I do know that they did a lot of collaboration and just start building prototypes with NJ, the engineer. So there was an internal build that the beta then came out of called Sparkler. And I know they just did a lot right inside the build.
I see. Would you say that the product was initially developed specifically for the US market?
I feel like yes, like I feel like a core team was definitely in San Francisco, but from what I remember, after Lars, one of the earliest designers that joined the team was Carmen, and Carmen came from, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, from an acquisition in Romania. So I think there was a pretty big Romania team that was like had really talented engineers and designers, and so I wouldn't say like, I mean, I think a majority of the team is in San Francisco, but that's kind of like the cool thing about not only just Adobe, but the fact that like XD went out and acquired a team in Romania, and then Carmen's been a big influence in the XD team from the very beginning, right with Talon and Lars. And then I think inherently I believe I've been working very closely with the engineering team that does some of the work in XD in India. And I believe that there was a team that was working a lot on Dreamweaver. If any of you remember, Dreamweaver was based in India, and when Dreamweaver kind of like started getting kind of like whatever.
Sunsetted.
Yes. I was going to say descoped, but yes, sunsetted. That team kind of became a part of XD, and it's kind of wild because they're like, I feel like inside XD there are all these like historians of different parts of XD and certain features. So when I work with my PM in India, he'll have like references to things that happened 3 years ago, and he's like, oh yeah, we tried to do that, but then we switched. But like I feel like over time global teams have become part of XD, but the team has the biggest presence in San Francisco, but I wouldn't say it was only made for the US market.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think any tool that Adobe makes has a global audience in mind, because we just serve an international audience, customer base.
Yeah, I feel like that I have used pretty much all the Adobe tools in like the English version. So I'm like, now I'm curious on like how does it look like on the other languages, like. So okay, so let's move on to the next question. So is XD designed to be in conjunction with any other Adobe tool? If yes, which ones are those? Because I feel like that there's like some like plugins that you can use and that it connects with like some tools. If you can speak a little bit to that would be great.
Start with that one. Yeah, interoperability within Adobe is probably one of our, biggest advantages, but also one of our hardest problems that we have to solve. We have, really old flagship apps and a lot of new modern tools. And so it's something we're always striving for, and it's obviously something that's super important to the team, but it is a really challenging problem. So the way we handle it is oftentimes, certain support for certain apps that make the most sense that work together. And so I think, for example, with XD, something that we feel was a natural fit was Illustrator. So we have invested in being able to like import and export, also Photoshop, to just be able to kind of edit photos by opening up Photoshop, because that might be where we lack, but Photoshop obviously has expertise. So as in terms of plugins and stuff, I'm not super familiar, but we do have some like shortcuts of getting in and out of apps. Like for example, with photos, you can just right click on one and say edit in Photoshop. But I don't know if you guys have have any more insight into plugins or anything.
I feel like plugins have become one of like our biggest way to kind of collaborate with other outside of XD tools. One of the things that I learned as personally as a designer working on XD was early on when I was kind of proposing some things. It was Talon who kind of told me, who helped me realize that maybe some features are best left to a plugin. And like maybe some features are best left to like Photoshop or Illustrator to do. XD doesn't need to start becoming a Swiss knife and like start trying to do everything and not be good at any one thing. So I think one of the big things that happened, I remember distinctly last year, was there was a huge like plugin fund that was generated in XD. Like we reached out to a lot of people and asked them to submit ideas for what kind of plugins that we could help you create. So like there were a lot of like smaller design teams, smaller engineering teams from all around the world that proposed a lot of ideas, and we kind of like gave them a little bit of seed funding to help them, give them guidance, and then kind of bring them to par so that we could launch their plugins. And I think we've launched quite a few. Like I discovered new plugins almost like on a weekly basis now. In fact, the interesting thing is that we have an internal design system that's called Spectrum, and we have found using plugins so successful that Spectrum has now built a plugin for XD, which has been super helpful. So I think like plugins are the other way that we kind of try to use other apps.
Awesome. So does the UX similar software influence the way designers interact with XD interface? How does that affect your design process?
Could you say that first part again?
Yeah, does the UX of the other similars? So it's kind of like how often do you review like other tools? I think we did talk a little bit about that. Like you do take a look at what Sketch is doing and what's because I feel like there's like a tons of like new but like smaller companies who are doing like online shared design, kind of like share prototype type of thing. So like how much does that influence your design process? Like pretty much like how do you run your research? How often do you look at your competitors? And then also how like what, because like I think Gayatri was getting to a point of like determining some features maybe it's better for a plugin, and so like what's the determined factor of what feature you think should be part of the core product and what should be more as kind of like a plugin?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one again. I think obviously doing your competitive analysis is super important, and we do it all the time. It's definitely something that helps, get a feel for how things are working in the market. But I think in terms of how much it affects us, we always do try to take what's out in the market with a grain of salt and then come back in and kind of refocus on what XD's goals are and what XD's perspectives is. And, we do try and do things, we even call it sometimes the XD way. So we always look, but it's a good part I enjoy about the team is that it's not driving our product roadmap or anything. But we do have pretty good relationships with other teams. I mean, there are things that even some of the teams we come to a decision on together. I mean, it was just recently we decided to rename master component to main component with Figma. So we are actually in direct contact with them, and we will make decisions together sometimes.
Gotcha. And what are some of the features that you're working on that you feel really excited about? Well, I mean, obviously, like if there's any things that you're working on, but like let's say something that you have already launched, like what are some of the existing features that makes you really excited about? Because like personally, when I use XD, I thought like the one thing that I really love is that the animations, like I don't need to know how to code, and I can like easily put together some animations and like effects to kind of like show when I'm doing the interaction design. So is there something that excites you?
Well, I'll go first because I want to brag on Gayatri a little bit. I think anytime features are actually released to the public, we are so excited because we've seen them being polished and worked on for so long, and we all really want that to be a part of the product. So Gayatri worked on and owned this feature that just launched on Tuesday, called multi-flows. So it now lets you, if you've made a prototype in XD, it used to be that you sort of had it was like one linear way to share that prototype, but you might have like multiple little mini flows that you want to share out. Like you only want to share these kind of 5 screens with somebody because your files get really big. And so Gayatri, was like the owner of this feature that now lets you export multiple different kind of slices of your larger file. So that's pretty exciting. What about the rest? What about you all, Gayatri and Hilary?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ainsley. I was kind of nervous because I was like, do I at some point have to explain multiflows and how am I going to use the words to explain it? And I feel like sometimes the person who's like spent the most amount of time thinking about the pixels of it explains it the worst because they can't distill it down. So thank you so much, uh, Ainsley. I think like one of the um, what other features have I been really, really excited about? I think for me, one of the I'll kind of like we'll do the round robin. I guess this is round robin, but I think one of the big things for me that was a game changer, especially last year or this past year, was components. It was something that Hilary worked on, and it. I will be honest, like. I was 1 year into XD and I wasn't an expert on all UX terminologies. And when you work with a bunch of designers who are making UX tools, the vocabulary list gets exponentially longer. So it took me a while to like, when she was working on the designs of this, when she was figuring out the architecture of it. And for those of you who've used components, you can imagine in Crit, there isn't so much to design as much as there is to like explain how the damn thing works. It's like a lot of like technical architectural systems that you explain, and all Hilary would have on the screen would be a button with different variations and arrows between them. And it took me like 2 crits to like finally understand what she was talking about and finally be able to like contribute to the conversation. But I'll just say that like for me, I was like someone who kind of understood it but didn't really understand it. But like when I finally understood it and started, I think my biggest learning curve happened when I was actually using test bills inside the app. And that was like one of the like aha moments for me of like kind of what Hilary was talking about previously about like the XD way of doing things. When you it kind of is like a brick by brick learning mechanism of like you make one component, then you want to make a variation of that component, and you want to set a states and like setting default actions on it, like the hover state, things like that. Small smart things that are really delightful when you actually are on the journey of understanding of how to use the tool. Even was really exciting when I started. So for me, it was like not just the feature, but it was also the learning curve I had of learning how to use it.
Well, so when I joined Adobe, I had barely used XD. So, and I think Alex still makes fun of me for telling him that in my interview. He was like, why would you do that? But so for me, actually, my favorite features are maybe because I know too much now, but are a lot of the ones that were released either right before I joined or maybe right in the beginning of when I joined. But there's just like some of these features that for me are just like really, they nailed it. They really thought about, you know, what UX designers are doing and what kind of presets they might want. And so repeat grid, how many times we copy and paste things. I mean, and then just being able to adjust the space between them, it still blows my mind. I just can't believe someone came up with it. and then responsive resize, right? Like that for me, and Ainsley actually worked directly on this, so I think we all called each other out, but it is truly one of my favorite features. I just think
I don't
it's
think I know about that one, responsive design. Like,
yeah,
it's very intriguing because
yeah,
right now we still we use Sketch a lot. We use like kind of like interchangeably with XD. We hop between the two because there's like different features that we like. But that is a really really cool thing because you don't
yeah,
have to do the responsive every time.
yeah. So there is a number of layout features in XD now, you know, similar to some of the features they have in Sketch with Smart Layout. So responsive resize is kind of the default of how you may resize objects or groups on Canvas. And then there are a number of layout features we've introduced recently, like stacks and padding. So definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I will. Like right after this, I'm going to open my XD and play around with it because like it will save a lot of time.
Yeah.
So it looks like someone from the audience, Kennedy, is saying that there's like a project management plugin that's like she had worked on for a Creative Cloud product. I thought that is super interesting because I feel like it would be helpful for us to like track tasks and stuff too. So just want to bring it up in case if you're thinking about like the next big features to build, like maybe that could be one.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then like what about like cause like AR VR prototyping, because I know that like Adobe XD does pretty good with like some animations, interaction design. Like do you have any features or like for AR VR?
Yeah, I actually just participated in one of Adobe's creative jams last week, and some of the prototypes that came out of it were very AR oriented. And so there are a lot of really cool drag features that you can do to kind of simulate being able to move around in a space in prototyping. But it's definitely something we talk a lot about, and it's just kind of balancing some of those future thinking prototyping features with current ones. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that one.
I don't have anything to add.
Gayatri, anything else?
Specifically to AR, VR, I can't think of it, but I think of something that we are working on immediately, but like considering that we just had a meeting earlier today, and one of the last things that we launched was a lot of like voice command support, and considering we've kind of ebbed into that space, this like Pandora's box has now been opened. So now we're thinking about everything. We're thinking about a lot of different ways to support designers to create not just like voice interactions, but AR tools, like maybe video support, like everything's on the table and we're considering it all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Looking into different, you know, facets of prototyping is definitely like a huge topic all the time. And on that, it's maybe not AR, VR specific, but tune into Max this year because there are some cool things that are maybe in that spatial area.
Gotcha. Nice. Thank you so much, Hilary. And so next we're gonna want to learn a little bit about the XD team because like obviously the three of you work together, but we're interested in learning about like how big is the team? Like, do you have like is everybody product designers, or do you have like UX designer, interaction designer, visual designer? Like, do you have like separate roles, or like how does that work? What's the dynamic like?
Yeah, I actually forget how many of us there are exactly because we have a couple interns right now. We have we have a couple people moving around, but I think it's like between 15 and 20. Does that sound right to you all?
Mm-hmm.
Say more like 20.
Okay.
At least, yeah.
And we're rarely all together in the same space, so I always forget. But yeah, there's about 20 designers. We all have slightly different backgrounds, as you know, the three of us have alluded to, but there's not one kind of like type of Adobe designer or XD designer. I think as a company and as a team, we're really kind of interested in generalist type designers, because depending on the project, you will need different skill sets. But I would say we all, you know, are somewhat skilled visual designers, but really the emphasis on XD is to be able to kind of think through multiple levels of complexity in a product. So there's the one kind of feature you're being asked to design, and then all the things that could go wrong with that. And then zooming out one layer, it's like, how does that interact with all of the rest of the existing features in the product and the paradigms we've already set? And then zooming out one level higher is like, how does this interact with other Adobe tools and the sort of patterns that are set up there? So I think that's really important, to be able to first and foremost kind of like communicate your idea, and then think through a bunch of different angles of it, and then really work with people to find the best solution. Because honestly, like any of you all who do UX know, there's like the initial kind of blue sky vision, and then there's what is technically feasible in the time you have. And so you have to be able to find that best compromise. And so humility and resilience is also required. It's really important.
I think you made a good point, though, in terms of like our backgrounds. I think, you know, we'll hire for something where we see kind of a need. So, for example, I've been working on design systems, and, you know, just general system design features, so components and states and things like that. But where I was lacking was like a developer background. So we recently just got a designer who actually was a developer first. And so she's able to kind of complement me in that way and really help out in some of the areas that I'm lacking. So
yeah. Interesting. And I know we're going to do Q&A later, but I did see relating questions to what we were talking about. So Caroline is asking regarding user researchers on the team, because I think Ainsley just said that you're all kind of like more generalists, so everybody does a little bit of everything. I guess, like, do you have a couple people that focuses primarily on research?
So the way that the Adobe kind of design team works is that all the designers at Adobe are kind of on one central team. It's a centralized design team that's kind of then serves the rest of the company. And that's the way the research team works as well. So there's kind of one central research team, and then which sits inside of Adobe Design, and then they kind of are like they're kind of like loaned out to different teams. And we actually, luckily though, have a dedicated researcher whose name is Lindsay Wallace, and she's amazing. But then we've also worked with other members of the research team, depending on what what we're trying to research and test with customers and get feedback on.
Gotcha. Great. So we do have quite a few questions that came in. I'd like to just like ask one more questions from our list, and then maybe we can get into the audience questions. So I'm really interested in knowing like the process that you use to form a product roadmap. So like, how do you design, like how many features to publish like each year? Like, do you do it quarterly? Like how does that work?
it's a very on topic question because it's currently what we're doing.
Very nice.
I can take this one since I'll give Ainsley and Hilary a quick break. So I think from it's an evolving process. Like I've been part of like 2 cycles of this, and both what's been really nice to see is that the feedback that we get from the previous process is implemented to make the next process better. So I can kind of like speak back and forth between the last process and this process. So I think as we go through the year, these kind of like requirements through user voice, through just industry trends, our competitors kind of just keep getting collected. And it's not like we like come to the table and like are like, oh my God, what are we going to work on next year? We all have like a more or less of a keen idea of what we think is the most impactful, but where it kind of starts getting funneled in is kind of like this time we started earlier in the year, but towards the end of the year, where we kind of start asking the question of like, what is going to help us win next year, or what features that we think as purely as Adobe can really enhance XD. And we're divided in the team into squads. So each designer a PM, or two or three designers a PM. And then there's an engineering squad associated with it. And it's kind of like broadly divided into design systems, collaboration, which is what I'm on, core design, and prototyping interaction, and growth. I think those are all of them. And each of those squads kind of spend some time together and kind of deliver their own vision, but I think they're pretty ruthless in the way they prioritize what they think their goal is. And then those squads, like I think the PMs then go together, or even the design team, we're discussing each other's features. We all come together and then say, okay, like of all these squads, we kind of rank them and say, this is what's going to take a lot of engineering effort. This is what's going to take a core chunk of like design effort, and rank those as well. And I'm going to kind of like parrot what we've been discussing in those meetings, but mostly it ends up being such that we set up a vision where we think it's like achievable, but also a little bit like shoot to the moon kind of thing. And we don't want to be in a place where like we completely get demoralized and don't achieve anything, because what does that say about the process? Did we not know the realities of doing this thing and like kind of shoot too far? Or did we achieve everything and then not set kind of like a moonshot vision that was like aspirational enough for us? So it's kind of a balance. But the one thing I definitely will say, like even just through like starting from the planning phase to this year, there have been some hard decisions that have been taken during this process, during the year as well. And that has kind of been the beauty of XD within the behemoth that is Adobe, is that the team has been able to kind of like regroup and be like, hey guys, like this is going to get deprioritized, but like how can we still do something better in this other area? And if we're not doing this, then what makes up for that? And reprioritized things even middle of the year. So that's broadly the way we kind of funnel into the plan or the roadmap for the year.
Cool.
Yes, so the process is called concept accept. So the idea is, we come up with this like broad vision that Gayatri is talking about, and then we'll put together, we'll put together kind of a prototype that then our PMs will take and present to our executives and kind of say like, so it really comes from the bottom up instead of the top down at Adobe. And so they say, this is what we want to work in. We kind of get the approval, or maybe you need to change the things. I've actually never been part of one where we needed to change things. So that's a good sign. And then, yeah, as Gayatri said, like we do reassess throughout the year. So it's not like a completely waterfall experience or anything. But.
Gotcha. And someone in the audience asked if you use agile approaches. Is this something?
Not quite agile. I'd say it's somewhere like in between. I think like as a big company, a company that has, a large conference at the end of the year, we have things in times we have to hit. And we do need to plan for how we're going to get there. But the team is very reactive, I'd say, especially XD within Adobe, to change and considering when something isn't, maybe we're seeing something else in the market and we need to switch it up. But
Cool, cool. Gotcha. Great. So I'm going to jump into the audience questions now. If Hilary, Gayatri, and Ainsley, you do have like that Q&A panel, if you can find it. I can also like read it off the list, so we can go through them. And also, just for all the attendees, I want to remind you that we want to like make this more interactive. So you're welcome to speak. If you do want to just ask your questions verbally, just raise your hand, and then we will let you use your microphone, and you can like speak to the speaker to the XD team directly. So with that, so the first question that came in a little bit earlier, so I think we did touch on that, is what's your favorite feature of XD that you have worked on? So I guess like maybe think about like the XD feature that you have personally worked on versus like earlier we said like something that you're excited about. Maybe you're excited about it, but you didn't work on it. So yeah, so if you can tell us what it is that is your favorite feature.
Yeah, that's from our friend and teammate Val. Hi, Val.
Oh.
I loved working on responsive resize. That's something I've worked on, and as far as something I love using, I still think some of those micro interaction features are so magical, like auto animate and having states work so that when you really hover over something or when you really drag something, it works. I think all of those are pretty magical. So that's like auto animate and then component states.
Hilary, did you have?
Yeah, I think I also kind of hit on it in the beginning, some of my features. I mean, I just noticed that Talon, our founder designer we mentioned, is actually in the chat now. So if you have any questions for him, you can ask him. Yeah, I mean, repeat grid, as Ainsley mentioned, a lot of the prototyping features, I think auto animate is just a genius feature. It's something that makes a little bit of work feel like really polished. So it's I think I saw a tweet at some point where someone said, like, if you want to impress your stakeholders, just use auto animate, and it's true.
I think I mean, of all of the above that Ainsley and Hilary mentioned, but I think the other kind of like the only one that I can think of other than that is like kind of in the vein of what Hilary was saying, of like, if you want to really impress someone with what you've thought about through your design, is I have to say the voice feature.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it works perfectly. It's really easy to execute, and it always gets the wow in the room. Even if there are designers in this chat today, if you are trying to go for an interview or if you're trying to work on a client project, it doesn't hurt to think a little bit further and have a little bit of fun with your project, and people will always appreciate it, and you'll have like thought about your project a little bit differently. So I would definitely encourage people to mess with that a little bit.
Nice. And I did activate Talon's microphone in case if you want to like add to it. We're excited to have you here. Or if you just want to like say hi, up to you. You don't have to, no pressure. So let's see, I will. Gotcha. Awesome. Talon said he or she, I don't know. He said that he wants to hear from the three of you. Wonderful. So the next question is from Kennedy. It's been mentioned a few times that XD is one of many options available now. I'm curious, as a designer, what you feel like is the strengths? Like how do you set yourself apart from all the other tools? Which is like true, like as we were talking about, like 5, 6, well, I guess like 8 years ago, there's like no tool that is like really that great at like doing web design, but now there's like a bunch of different tools. So like, how do you set yourself apart?
Yeah, I feel like Hilary touched on this and spoke really well about the way we do competitive research, but then always make decisions rooted in the XD way. And Hilary, did you want to like maybe expand on what that means?
Yeah, I can expand. I think, what we try to do as a team is just really think about like, what is kind of the 80% of what users want to do. And so, and how can we kind of help them get there faster and smarter. And so I think that, repeat grid and responsive resize is a really good example of that, right? Because we, Talon specifically, as he saw designers copying and pasting things across artboards or in the same artboard, multiple times, why should you have to do that, right? So kind of just made a setting for being able to just instantly do that and adjust the spacing between things. And responsive resize is another really good example of that. While in Photoshop resizing something or Illustrator, maybe they are trying to scale things, but actually that wasn't kind of what people were wanting to do with web design, right? They weren't wanting to scale things. They wanted to, maybe they would have to like click into a group and resize just the background bar and move things around. But we could set up defaults for users to make sure that they could achieve that, because that was kind of the most common use case we were seeing. So it's really just paying attention to what users are doing and like trying to eliminate the things that they don't have to do. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for that. So another questions is, I've been using Adobe Suites for a while and got surveys in the mailbox once in a while. A little bit curious on where the survey went and how the process behind that seemed like. Like, do you have like a set time, like every quarter you review all the emails, feedback? Because like I do that. Like sometimes if I get frustrated with like a tool, I think I did that with Twitter. Like that was like something I really frustrated about, and then I send them an email. But it's good to know that you're already like collecting feedback. So like tell us about that process and how that works.
Well, I don't know what specific emails this person is getting, if they're like general Creative Cloud ones or Adobe. I haven't worked on that side of the product, but I know that we have an in-product survey where we collect feedback, like kind of right on the home screen. And we do regularly check on, and that's kind of a 1 through 10 and an optional feedback, because that's just like a really easy temperature check for how people are feeling about our product. And if we get that feedback, there's actually another team that sort of summarizes it and says like, listen, these are the trends, this is what people are saying really bothers them, or what they really like about the way XD is moving. I'm not as sure about the email surveys. It almost sounds like something where you're on a list of people who they know are active users and want to specifically hear from you. But don't like quote me on that. I'm not as sure about that one.
Gotcha. Anyone else to add to that?
I don't know about surveys really. Like I know that you might have been put on a list if at some point you were part of some kind of a research study that you did, because I know a lot of products try to run those like they're like, I often see in Slack, they're like, do you have any designer friends who would be willing to do a research study that you might be a part of? But I think that, I mean, kind of what you were saying earlier when you were asking the question was that if you have something that's happening in the product that you kind of have more of an idea for, or a feature request or something specifically for XD, we have user voice, where a lot of features are requested and explained in a lot of detail, and it is used quite extensively. I kind of actually had a little bit of fun with it yesterday, because when I was first designing the multiple flows designs, I had spent a lot of time on user voice and screenshotted a lot of requests who had in detail explained how they would like the feature to work. And I had a little bit of fun and went to the one that was the most upvoted and posted how we have now launched this feature. So you can talk to us on it and vote on those things, and we do spend time looking at it a lot.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because like every once in a while I get really frustrated with like one thing, and like, because as a designer, as a UX designer, then you're like, okay, you could have done that, the button could have been more obvious, and like etc. So I'm so glad that you have like a structure where you're accepting feedback and that you do evaluate that. So
also Twitter, a lot of us are on Twitter, particularly active is our VP Andrew, and that stuff we share even in Slack. Like when people are frustrated with a feature, having issues, or I mean, we like it when something new launches or people really like it, we share that too. But that is like a pretty direct.
What is the Twitter handle? We can put it here.
A Shorten, I believe.
Yeah.
But I think he's like pretty closely looking at Adobe XD, literally like @Adobe XD is the handle. Our Slack is full of screenshots of conversations over there.
Adobe XD. Andrew is A Shorten. Yeah, A Shorten, ASHORT.
There you go. I think Talon put it there.
Perfect.
In the chat.
But this is for
on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I
put it for the attendees to also see.
We're on there.
Yeah.
The team is constantly looking at Twitter, and if you do post something, you may get a response back from Andrew Shorten himself.
Yeah.
So
very nice.
I mean, a lot of times I find Andrew will like tag the PMs who are directly responsible for that feature, and the PMs will be like, here's my email, can I talk to you more about this? Can I get your file and find out what kind of problem you're hitting? So they're pretty responsive.
That's great. Cool. Next, we have, what were some of the things you learned from beta launch that changed XD's release or surprised you? From Rosie. Thank you, Rosie, for the question.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Rosie. I feel like we've been talking a lot about how much we love the product, and that is maybe annoying, but I'm going to keep doing that, because that was around the time that I had recently joined Adobe and had been using XD. And so like, I was just excited at how fast it was. So the alternative I had been using was like, would get really slow as you added things to it, and it would kind of bug out and freeze. And so I would say, like, again, sorry, not sorry to say how impressed I was with the performance of it. But I would also say, like, I remember even then how much people just immediately started wanting more. There were these kind of initial amazing features like repeat grid that made everyone's life easier, but then like people always kind of want the next thing. And so I feel like that was a big lesson from that initial beta launch, is that exposing your product to the world early is a good thing, because you get that direct feedback about what people are looking for and how it can improve.
Nice. And how do you measure success when launching new features app?
Twitter.
The sentiment on Twitter. You use like an AI to read this Twitter sentiment and figure out.
Yes, we have metrics. We measure the monthly active of users, and we measure how many people are using it for a certain amount of time every week. We measure how many people kind of download it and then come back. And so we're just looking, I mean, long story short, at usage.
Also, I guess the other thing to add is that we're all, I mean, if it's not obvious, like we're all working on the app all the time. All of us, like even our PM teams is making their presentations on XD, and it's not just the XD team working on XD, it is the other like Lightroom and Photoshop, all these other like Creative Cloud teams that are working on XD as well. So there is a lot of internal feedback that we do receive as well, and they can sometimes be our harshest critics about some of these features. So like we have a pretty strong group of people who are we work with.
Your own like team as your user study subjects, right? Because you're all designers.
Yeah, sometimes lunch turns into a feedback session, depending on who you go to lunch with.
Nice. Yeah, I did. I think I watched a video of XD introductions about how the team is using XD to design XD. So that was like kind of cool thinking about that.
Yeah, and you know, as Ainsley mentioned, like we have metrics and everything, and we joke about Twitter, but it is a good place for us to kind of hear from the community about, you know, some of that quantitative data, and you know, as Gayatri mentioned, the internal Slack things, but we also have a really great research team, so we learn from what's working and what's not working from our researchers as well, and hopefully use that to iterate.
Gotcha. And what's the, so next question is from Katie. What's the most difficult aspect of designing a tool for designers?
They are our biggest critics.
Yeah. I was going to say, like getting constant feedback.
Yeah. I can actually kind of speak to this too, because I think this is like a learning that I'm doing currently now, but it started kind of last year. Was like, I think I was definitely making like the rookie mistake of being like, all the users, all the designers are asking for this feature, so we have to design it. And I think in time of trying to design the solution, I was like convinced we had kind of the answer, and like 4 or 5 slide like artboards in, as I was clicking around, and I was just like, okay, this is not worth solving. And the interesting thing that happened was that I think I distinctly remember Talon and Hilary had already arrived at this solution before I arrived I arrived like 3 weeks later. And I think it was specifically to do with, I think it was grouping. For a long time, there was like a huge discussion about like grouping things. And when I like actually sat down with the problem, I realized that there are some things there you can't it's sometimes designers can design themselves into a problem if you give them too many tools, and sometimes it's less is more, and you can kind of create a pretty destructive path if you give them all kinds of tools that they ask for, every kind of like minuscule feature that they ask for. That was kind of like the biggest learning. It was like, that was a surprising thing to me, for me. Like sometimes it's better to just not do it.
Yeah, and Jane asked like a follow-up questions about like if you're talking about prioritizing, which I feel like I agree, because like there's a lot of wants and wishes, and everybody have different preferences, and so I guess like it's a matter of like prioritizing what makes sense, and then like figuring out what's is like, and I think we touched on that earlier. It's like maybe some features is better left off as a plugin than a core feature. So yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, like I can add on that a little bit of like prioritization also. Like, I mean, I say this kind of like a joke to say like not do anything, but the not do anything kind of has to be justified to our teams as well. And the way that it gets justified is that, hey, like 2 years from now, a year from now, 6 months from now, when we think about more holistically about a problem, kind of like what Ainsley was saying, of like kind of zooming out and seeing how does it relate to some of the other features. And then you go back and decide, hey, like maybe this is addressed not as part of this, but as something else. And we wait 6 months and then address this in the right way, rather than try to solve a problem and think short term about it.
Yeah,
I
awesome.
think designers too, they get really used to the features they have. Maybe it was like in Sketch or a different app. And for us, you know, I think we always like to question if that actually is the right solution, or if the thing they were trying to be achieved could actually be achieved better. And like Gayatri said, like that may have to be in a different way, you know, later down the line. But definitely, you know, always kind of asking those tough questions up front about, you know, what is this feature that the designer, you know, people are asking for, and what are they actually trying to achieve? And is there a better way there, or a better solution we could give them? So yeah.
Awesome. At this point, I want to remind everybody, like attendees wise, that if you want to speak to the XD teams, feel free to raise your hand and I can definitely make your microphone active and you can speak out your questions or if you want to have conversations or comments, feedback. Then the next question is from Talon himself. And he asked, what's been the most surprising thing about working at Adobe and working on XD? And I want to add on like a tag on questions on, I think a lot of people who are like thinking about working for Adobe would be interested in like learning about like, is the team hiring, and like if you can touch also on that, that would be great.
Let's see. What's the most surprising thing about working at Adobe and working on XD? I think at Adobe in general is just the pace of things, because I had come prior to Adobe, I'd worked at startups and kind of smaller companies. And at Adobe, because of the massive architecture that our software is built on, and because everything has to talk to each other and it's going out to this international audience, like everything has to be really thoroughly vetted before it reaches the public. And so that means that a feature that you work on could take 6 months or longer to reach the public and to be real. And then sometimes things don't ever launch at all because, you know, for a lot of reasons. And so I think that was a big surprise to me, because I had been used to working at like build fast or move fast and break things types of places where it was like, you know, better to just put something out even if it like was buggy. So yeah, I would say that was really, I mean, I guess that's about Adobe and XD. I'll pass the mic, and maybe I'll think of something else smart to say.
I don't know if I have a good answer either. I mean, honestly, I feel like sort of like Ainsley was saying earlier, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry. I will gush a little bit about my team. I think that was maybe the most surprising thing to me. The team is just so talented. I learn so much from them every day. And just like the openness and supportiveness, it's just a very healthy working environment. And I think, like Ainsley, I came from this very fast-paced, very demanding environment. So for me, that was kind of a fresh breath air. So, yeah.
Great, awesome. So next question from Nikita. I love the idea of collaborating with competitive tools like Figma to make terms universal. It makes things super easy for designers to transition. Could you touch a little on the design principles you follow at Adobe and how it helped shape XD?
Can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
Yeah, it's a little bit long. So I guess like it's like touching on the design principles that you follow at Adobe and how it helped shape XD, because like you know how like Amazon had the leadership principles and like things like that. It's more like about like collaborating and like how, because I love it when I can take a sketch file elements and like just like lay it on XD and that it does translate. It's kind of like that type of things. Like But I guess like I understand your like competitors, like maybe there's some certain things that you want to limit. So yeah, like maybe is there like some rules and principles that's in place?
Yeah. Actually, I think that, and guys, feel free to jump in, but I think for me, that's one of the things that really stuck out to me when I joined the XD team is the team itself has a very strong set of core principles. And like, maybe if you guys want to take a stab at kind of speaking to them, it's been a while since we brought them up and kind of talked about them. So maybe it'll be a good idea to refresh. But there's just kind of and we've said it a couple times now about like, solving things the XD way. There is a really strong sense of like how we solve problems, I think, on the team. And it kind of rubs off on any new members, I feel, right? Like it's just kind of how we ask questions, how we kind of provide feedback to the team and kind of push each other towards new solutions and kind of thinking outside of the box a little bit. But I don't know, do you guys have anything more specific to add to kind of those principles?
Yeah, I know that from the very beginning of the tool, it was important that it felt lightweight because we were hoping to be a contrast to the flagship apps. I think we talk a lot internally about the cockpit effect of Photoshop and even Illustrator and InDesign and all of these amazing, powerful tools that people do their work in and make money from using that tool. But I think XD was always founded in the desire to feel really accessible and really lightweight. And so we wanted it to always feel easy for people to get up and running. And so I think it's like at this point we have added so many amazing kind of intricate features that it's certainly like getting to be more complex than it was in the beginning, but I know that those are principles we still stick to. It's like, how can we make the most kind of minimal UI for our features? That's one of the reasons why the UI is actually light, like literally a lighter color, because it is founded in that feeling of being like a fresh alternative, or not alternative, but a fresh contrast to kind of the Photoshop and Illustrator and that dark gray color. So those are things that we still stay in touch with all the time, is like, because we know that a big portion of any UX audience is people who are transitioning careers. And so being able to make that first prototype really quickly and communicate that idea that helps somebody start to do a job that they're kind of in the beginning stages of, that's really important to us.
Yeah, I think that's like a good lead in for the next question. Before I get to that, I just want to say that we are trying to aim for like wrapping up at around 7:30. So we'll answer the remaining questions and then we'll call it good. And then stay until the end. Reminder that you might win a free 1 full year license of Creative Cloud. So with that, you're talking about like people transitioning and like making it easy for them to like learn a tool. So Katie asked at the beginning, you mentioned fake it till you make it mindset. And do you have any tips on how to overcome imposter syndromes as a designer working at such a successful and re-owned company?
I'm going to say what I kind of said at the beginning, and then I'll let them, Ainsley and Hilary, chime in. But I'll say that like when I first joined, like, and I joke about this pretty often, is that when I came out of, usually designers come out of design school, start working, and I was like one of the, I don't know if like too many people go back to school for masters. Wasn't something I was planning on, but I had gone to school for like graphic design, and I feel like things had transitioned and I went to school for masters. So when I joined Adobe, I was like, I know everything. I'm so ready for this job. But like the reality is that like you join a team, and then they're like, I mean, even I'm sure like even when people like come to Adobe or leave Adobe, and having had worked at Adobe 7, 8, 10 years, each product team has, and each kind of like workspace has their own terminology, own way of addressing issues. It's can become very, very narrow, and like someone who's coming in is always going to be introduced to all these new terms that might feel kind of like pretty common to everybody else in the team, but not to you. And this is when I like reached out to Hilary, and I was talking to people around me, and it's one of those things that you kind of just learn to be okay with not being okay with it. Like you kind of just learn to be I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone into and I'm thinking something and someone else says the same thing in the meeting, and then I'm kicking myself because I'm like, I was thinking the same thing, why didn't I say it? I like speaking to this event, you like, especially maybe like perhaps being a woman, you second guess yourself a little bit more than our male counterparts. So my advice Ainsley's advice to you is the advice that I will also give, is that, and I'm guilty of it most of the times, I feel like I'm apologizing for my behavior, if I'm apologizing for not knowing something. It's okay to not know, because you should not feel like you need to know everything, because nobody knows everything. And this industry is changing so fast also that you don't need to. Like,
yeah, definitely. There's something new to learn every day. Hilary, Ainsley, anything to add to that?
You go first, Hilary.
I always like want to give a second just in case. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm almost kind of forgetting the question, to be honest with you, but go ahead, Ainsley.
I was going to say overcoming imposter syndrome.
Okay, yeah, overcoming imposter syndrome. Yeah, I think it just, I mean, I'm 8 years into it. I still have it all the time. Like Gayatri said, I think, the more you go up in your career, you're always going to feel and compare yourself against people. But I think just, being open, being curious to learning is always super important. And like, learning from others, like Gayatri said, just, putting yourself out there as much as you can. It gets easier and easier, but I wouldn't say it ever goes away.
Yeah, just to build, because I'm all about talking about how you really feel and being vulnerable. And I think I assume that I'm speaking to kind of a majority femme audience. And I think as femme identifying people, we're often the ones who are a little bit more skilled at showing vulnerability. And I think that's good to do. And as Gayatri mentioned, like asking your questions, but I'll just share some tips that I have, which are, because like Hilary and Gayatri both said, especially if I move into a new area, I feel dumb. I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff, and people who have been working on it are so articulate, and they're using words that I don't really know what they mean. But then sometimes I just remember another thing in my life that I know really well or I'm really skilled at. And that may mean another like kind of area of your job that you've spent time in. It may mean like you're really good at an instrument, or all of a director's work, or you're really into a particular musician and you can talk about all their different albums. And what that feeling is like when you're really able to like talk about something a lot and all these facts. And so sometimes I just remind myself, like, I know things, it's like, I'm smart about some things and I can get smart about this. And I think I would also echo, like, I know you all have heard this, to ask questions, but I've recently been trying this thing where I'm like, if I just ask a question confidently,
Mm.
then I sound smart instead of posing it in a way that's like, I'm sorry, I don't know this already, but it's like, it's legitimate that you don't know something. Like, I hope that you're not working with people who expect you to know everything, because that would be terrible. And the people who know those things, like, didn't used to know those things either.
Yeah.
So I try to remember those things.
Yeah, and I really love, like, Ainsley, your approach of like asking a questions confidently, because I feel like that is like going back to like that fake it till you make it. It's like, it's one thing to like try to appear confident, but then it's another to like, if you don't know something, then you don't know. Like, it's better to ask, then from that point on, you know. So yeah, just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. And people can get really jargony too, I think, in tech work especially, and you start using shorthands and terms, and then somebody's like, what does that acronym mean? And you're like, oh yeah, sorry, like, of course you don't know what a PPC is, because that means nothing to you until you know.
Yeah.
I mean, questions too are so important. Like, you can not ask a question and spend a long time trying to figure it out, you know, on your own after the fact. Whereas if you just ask someone the question and clarify it and move on, you're going to save yourself tons of time. So it's definitely okay to ask questions.
Yes. Perfect. So we're out of time, but maybe we can touch quickly on that one last questions about accessibility, and if your product adjusts that and test for it, and what's the benchmark?
Good question. Hilary, Gayatri, do either of you?
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess there's, I'm not sure if there's 2 questions in there or 1, but if the question is like, how do we design for accessibility, or yeah. Well, it's definitely something that Adobe, you know, is working on. And so I think, you know, there's different aspects to accessibility. And so, you know, one thing I know is like, we have a design system, which will have, you know, some baked in accessibility requirements to it. And then, you know, as far as the apps go, I think actually it wasn't too long ago that we released, or that iOS released a version where you can actually you can kind of tell XD what to design in a way. Like, do you guys know what I'm talking about? There's like some iOS release, and I don't remember what it is. You can definitely look it up on YouTube, but yeah, we are always looking at, you know, kind of baking into those accessibility features as they become available to us, but we could definitely do better.
I think the feature you're talking about is called like Mac Voice to design and prototype. I mean, we definitely have to get better, but it kind of, I also feel like we were in a recent discussion where I think one of our designers, Carmen, was talking about a feature that she designed where she had to like push quite a lot on, I think it was in a workshop with her, and someone used XD as an example for being accessible, and all of us were like thank God. I mean, it is obviously like we're all involved in our day-to-day kind of feature designing, but then we try to, like, it's our job, really our responsibility to advocate for some of these things. And I feel like when designers have stood up like and asked for it, there's always been support from the PM and engineering teams. Like, I can't think of a single time when any one of us designers or like someone externally has brought up something and it has not been at least meaningfully addressed somehow, if now or later. But some of the things that we have like tried to also introduce is like better keyboard navigations, small incremental changes, like improving contrast and some subtle like tools and icons. Those are things that always constantly come up in crits as well. Also, like, to make designers more effective in their work, being more accessible is also something we have to think about as a tool. And there are a couple of like accessibility plugins that I think do pretty well. I mean, I don't think that they're like the best, but like I think they get you 50% of the way there, and then you have to like buy a subscription to make it work better. Of course, we try to also make it more accessible in languages. I know that we got into an interesting discussion about recently about there are a lot of readers who read from right to left and not left to right. So how do we think about designing apps like that? These are active discussions that go on, but just as designers, the responsibility, I think, falls first on us. And I think internally, every time it's been brought up, it has been supported by our partner teams.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I want to say thank you, the XD team. Thank you so much for having this partnering with us on this event and like telling us all about the behind the scenes stuff. It's been a pleasure like learning about the team. I guess like as a wrap up, like I was wondering like if the team is hiring. I think a lot of our attendees would love to know if you are, and like where should they go if to watch for career opportunities.
I think the team is actively looking at kind of what the roadmap is and what the resources our team will need next year. So definitely check out the careers page. A lot of that stuff gets posted kind of after we do all of that resourcing. But I do know that Adobe has started posting some roles and have kind of opened back up hiring since the pandemic started. So,
gotcha. Great. And so with that, we promised you that we will give out a free license of Creative Cloud. So we are using an automated system to generate a winner. So with that, without further ado, we're announcing it. And the winner, please reach out to us on either Slack or on, so thank you, Gayatri, for sharing the open position in the chat. So we'll post that on our Slack channels as well. So winner, when you hear your name, please reach out to us on Slack or on meetup.com so we can get you information. So let's see if the winner is still here if you stay until the end to get your free license. Let's see. It is Moti. Moti, are you still here? Yay, you are. Moti, can you like say hi or something to make sure that, you raised your hand, perfect. I'm gonna allow you to talk. Do you wanna say something? Congratulations, you just won the free license.
Hi.
Congrats.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I don't live in Seattle. I just joined the Seattle group, I think today, and I got into this event, and it's just so super
Perfect.
exciting.
So it's like your first time attending and you won something. Wow.
Yeah, I think
Lucky.
that's my night. Maybe I should keep applying the whole night today.
Yeah. So please send us a message, like PM us your email address or something, so we can get you your gift. And like as a note, reminder for all the attendees, like join our Slack channel if you want to connect with each other, or if you want to connect with the presenters, like find them on LinkedIn, and that's it. And again, special thank you for Adobe XD for sponsoring this event. It's been a pleasure getting to know you all, Hilary, Gayatri, and Ainsley. So thank you so much.